Thank you, Mataji. And thank you to the Vedanta Society of North Texas, the technical support, and all of those who make this possible. Again, as I said yesterday, I'm glad to be here. Some of you who are here today were not here yesterday. So again, I want to express my thanks to the center, to the Mataji, and express my appreciation for the wonderful work that goes on here in Dallas. This is a relatively new center, not brand new. The Prabhajika Brahmaprana has been here for more than 12 years, and the center started before she got here, but still, in our Vedanta work, that still is enough to consider this a new center. And the work that has been done here is quite impressive. Brahmaprana, with the help of the trustees and advisors and devotees, has done remarkable work in developing this center, developing wonderful programs and outreach. And that's why we're here. Our Vedanta work is not to provide a comfortable place for the Swamis and Prabhajikas to live. It's to provide a place for the dissemination of ideas and for the development of spiritual life. And so again, I wish to express my deep appreciation for the wonderful work here. And so with that, and with my greetings to my dear brother, Swami Atmarupananda, I will jump in. So let me, as usual, begin with a chant. Om Parthaya Pratibodhitam Bhagavata Narayanena Swayam Vyasena Gratitam Purana Munina Madhye Mahabharatam Advaitam Ritavarshinim Bhagavatim Ashtadashadhyayinim Ambatvam Anusandadhami Bhagavad Gita Bhavadveshinim. We meditate on you, O Mother Bhagavad Gita, you who were made known to Partha, Arjuna, by the Lord Narayana himself. You who were included in the Mahabharata by the ancient sage Vyasa. You, the mother who rains down the nectar of Advaita, non-dualism, in 18 chapters. You, the destroyer of relative existence. Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om Tat Sat. Om peace, peace, peace be unto us all. So again, good morning. My topic, or good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good night, depending on where you are in the world. So my topic for this session is the ideal to be sought. Again, yesterday we dealt with karma yoga from the standpoint of the different yogas, because as I explained yesterday, karma yoga is a yoga that is focused on the method, not on the goal to be reached. There is, of course, a goal, and that is the central fact of each yoga, a yoga meaning a path to union. And so it's not that karma yoga ignores the goal, but it is a method-oriented yoga, which can be used in combination with different religious philosophies, different religious ideals. So when speaking of the ideal to be sought in karma yoga, there are a variety of ways of conceiving of the ideal, because there are a variety of ways of practicing karma yoga. And so each of the four yogas as described by Swami Vivekananda, and a categorizing of the yogas, a systematizing of the whole field of yoga, of spirit, that is of spirituality, which has become almost universal. You find teachers, Hindu teachers of all different varieties nowadays speaking in terms of the 4 yogas. And I even hear when I go to interreligious meetings, or rather, not just interreligious meetings, which oftentimes are just hierarchical heads of religious organizations, but when I go to interspiritual meetings, where the meeting is among spiritual aspirants, teachers of the spiritual path, there you hear Sufis, Jewish rabbis, Christians speak of Raja Yoga, Karma Yoga, Jnana Yoga, Bhakti Yoga. So this categorizing of the whole vast ocean of spirituality into 4, or rather the whole, better to use the analogy of the whole vast field of spirituality, into 4 major divisions, 4 paths that has spread beyond Hinduism, even into the spiritual thinking of aspirants in other paths as well. It's always a delightful surprise when I'm sitting in an interspiritual meeting where a Sufi teacher says, well, in Sufism, we look on Raja Yoga like this. Or we look on the path of karma, we have Karma Yoga, which we teach like that. And the same with rabbis and priests and others. So back to the topic, as I was saying, each yoga has its own conception of bondage, liberation, and the path to liberation, because each has a particular perspective on what the goal is, how to conceive of the goal. Now, we who are followers of Sri Ramakrishna believe that at the highest development of any path, there is union. You come to the same reality. But that reality in itself is a nirdeshyam. It's beyond indication. It's avang manasa gocharam. It's beyond mind and speech. Speech can't express it, mind can't conceive of it. And so, we being human beings who are locked into a mind at present, we're not the mind even, as Swami Atmarupananda brilliantly explained yesterday. We're not the mind, but we're locked into mentality right now. Our consciousness is identified with the mind, and we can't seem to find our way out of that. And so because we have a mind which only thinks in terms of images and words and concepts, there are different ways of conceiving of the inconceivable. So, for example, Jnana Yoga, and this is a gross simplification. There's more variety in Jnana Yoga than my explanation will indicate, but this is just to give a rough idea. So in Jnana Yoga, the goal is the knowledge of reality, not just knowledge of reality, but knowledge by identification, not knowledge of reality, but identity in knowledge with reality, which is the knowledge itself, where the knower, the thing known, and the process of knowing are not even distinct, where there's only knowledge, which is the reality itself. So the goal is, in simple terms, knowledge. The path to get there is inquiry into the reality until we know it directly in direct experience and know ourselves to be the reality. So bondage is, liberation is knowledge, bondage is ignorance, forgetfulness of who we are. And the path to get to the goal is remembering who we are in the path of devotion. Our problem, our bondage is from forgetfulness of our union with God in whatever way we conceive of our union with God, whether it's dualistic, qualified monistic, or non-dualistic. But our bondage comes from, in one sense, forgetfulness of God. We see a universe which is material, and we see ourselves as individuals interacting with the transactional physical and mental world, and God is nowhere to be seen. And so bondage in the path of devotion comes from forgetfulness of God. And so the path to liberation is remembrance of God and all that that means. And liberation is the realization of God. the direct, immediate experience of God. And that, of course, again, means different things according to different schools of devotion and how we characterize the relationship between the individual and the divine. But that, again, is in brief, in essence. In Raja Yoga, bondage is similar to Jnana Yoga. Bondage in Raja Yoga is caused by forgetfulness of our spiritual identity, identification with the mind and body, which comes from forgetfulness. So the root cause of our bondage is ignorance, and that ignorance is the cause of our identity with the mind and body. And so the goal is to know ourselves as the self, as the pure consciousness, as the reality. And the path to get there in Raja Yoga, and this is where Raja Yoga is distinct from Jnana Yoga, the path in Raja Yoga is to perfect the mind as an instrument, because the mind is an instrument of experience. Even Raja Yoga says, you are not the mind, but you are at present tied to a mind inextricably as far as you can see right now. You can't find your way to separate yourself from your mind. And so the Raja Yoga science says, perfect the mind as an instrument, and when the mind becomes perfectly clear, it gives you true experience. When the mind is unsettled, when the mind has waves, ripples of thoughts and emotions and reactions, you don't see reality as it is. When the mind is perfectly clear, you can actually see the distinction between the self that you are and the mind itself, and then you attain to liberation. So this is very brief, essential, the essence of the paths of Jnana, Bhakti, and Raja Yoga as far as bondage, liberation, and the path to liberation. So in Karma Yoga, because it is a method-driven path, there are different ways to conceive of it. And so that's what we're going to talk about in this first session. Bondage in general in Karma Yoga is the ignorance which leads us to think kartaham bhoktaham. You don't need to know the Sanskrit. I say it just because it is meaningful to some of you. And it's the way I think of it. And so once I say it, then I can translate it. It's easier for me. So kartaham means I am the agent. I am the agent of action. I'm a doer. And bhoktaham means I am the experiencer. I experience all of these things, good and bad, pleasurable and unpleasurable, sorrowful and joyful, etc. Knowledge, experience of knowledge and the experience of ignorance. I am the one who experiences things. So in Karma Yoga, our bondage is to think that I am the doer and the experiencer of things. Now, just to let me make a side note on that, because in the path of Jnana Yoga, as Swami Atmarupananda is dealing with it, in the path of Jnana Yoga, you to think that I am the experiencer, not the experienced. So when I say that the problem is that we are the experiencer, don't confuse that with the terminology in Jnana Yoga. Here, the problem is thinking that I am the doer and the receiver of experiences, not separating myself from the experienced, but thinking that I am the one who is receiving all of this experience. And so bondage is kartaham bhoktaham. I am the doer and I am the recipient of experience. And that is because of wrong identity. And that wrong identity comes, of course, from ignorance. And so bondage, according to the path of Karma Yoga, is that idea, that wrong identity, which comes from ignorance, which leads me to think that I am the doer and I am the experiencer, and the desire which comes along with that. When I think of myself as the doer and the experiencer, then I think that there are things I have to do. And they're things that I need to experience, things that I want to experience, things I want to avoid experiencing. And so that, in essence, is bondage according to Karma Yoga. In the simplest form, just remember, it's thinking that I am the doer. And liberation, according to Karma Yoga, is freedom. Liberation is freedom. Freedom from the very sense that I am the doer, I am the experiencer, that there's anything that I need to do, any purpose, any motivation. As I explained yesterday, excuse me, in our present state, we can't do anything without a motivation. And so we have to refine our motivation, get to higher and higher motivations, but we won't attain to freedom, liberation, until we are free from the very idea of motivation, of intention, of things that I need to do. Free from the very idea that I am the doer. So the bondage is from thinking that I am the doer. Liberation is freedom from that. And the path is to use action as a means to free myself. So it's using, as Sri Ramakrishna, to use Sri Ramakrishna's analogy, it's like taking one thorn to extract another thorn from your skin. Say in the days when the needles were not easily available, or even now if you don't have a needle and you get a splinter or something, or a thorn in your skin, you take a long thorn from a plant and you can pull it out. And then you throw both of them away. So in Karma Yoga, unlike Jnana and Bhakti, the goal is not karma. In Jnana Yoga, you use Jnana to attain to Jnana. The beginning, middle, and end are different concepts of Jnana. The very goal of Jnana Yoga, the path of knowledge, is knowledge. In Bhakti Yoga, the very goal of Bhakti Yoga is bhakti. You're seeking bhakti, that's the means and it is the end. In Karma Yoga, you're not seeking karma. You're seeking to be free from karma. You're seeking to rise above, to transcend karma, to transcend the very idea of karma. But you use karma in order to do that. And why do you use karma to do that? Because, as Sri Krishna says, and I quoted yesterday, Nahi, in the third chapter, Nahi kaschid kshanamapi jatuti statya karmakrit. No one can remain without action for even a moment. And so if everything is an action, even meditation is an action, even self-inquiry is a type of action, a mental activity. Let us learn to use the actions that we do, that we have to do, because life is such that we are always active. Let us learn to use action in such a way that it liberates us. The path of Karma Yoga is non-attachment in the midst of action. So bondage is I am the doer, and being caught up in action, the actions and reactions of our activities. The goal is freedom from action, and the path is a path of non-attachment. And in one way or another, surrendering the idea of doership. So non-attachment and surrender. It can be surrender to God or surrender of our identity to the self. That is, we can, as it were, back into the self. Don't take this too literally, but back into the self. That is, I'm not this, I'm not this. I am pure consciousness. I'm unaffected by anything. Everything happens within me, but I am to use the analogy Swami Atmarupananda was using yesterday, I am the screen, not the movie. So that's one way in Karma Yoga, to surrender the limited sense of I to the infinite. And the other way is to surrender it to God. God is the doer, I'm not the doer. So the path again in Karma Yoga is non-attachment and surrender of the sense of doership. I do nothing. So the path, as I just described it, It goes along either with the path of Jnana Yoga, surrender of my identity into the infinite. I am the infinite, not changing my identity, changing my wrong identity, because my identity is the infinite from the standpoint of Jnana Yoga. Understanding that and then trying to get rid of the ignorant I and knowing myself to be pure consciousness. Or it also goes with Bhakti Yoga, surrendering my I to God. God, you are the doer. You Twameva Mata Pita Twameva, etc. Thou art our mother, thou our father, thou our only friend and companion. Thou art my only wealth and my only knowledge. Thou art my all in all, O Lord of lords, O God of gods. So that idea that God, you are everything. This I surrender to you, because this I is only an appearance, only an illusion. You are the real doer. So so in general, again, in Karma Yoga, this is bondage liberation, and the path, non-attachment and surrender of the idea of doership. Just in the simplest explanation, it's similar to how you would follow Karma Yoga along with Jnana Yoga. That is, giving up the sense that I'm the doer, nature, prakriti, all activity is the changes of the gunas of prakriti, as Sri Krishna teaches in the Gita. And I am the stainless, infinite, all-pervading self, uninvolved in any action, the witness of action, but uninvolved in any action. And so in that sense, Karma Yoga is quite in tune with Jnana Yoga in its most simple explanation. But it also, as I said, can be followed with the path of devotion, where bondage is the same. Bondage is still caused by my thinking that I am the doer. I am the one responsible for my actions. I am the one who does the actions. I'm the one who gets the credit or the blame, even if I try to avoid the blame. But I am the doer. And liberation comes, if I follow Karma Yoga according to the path of Bhakti, comes from seeking God as seeing God as the doer. I'm not the doer, God is the doer. I do as you make me do. That beautiful song of Ram Prasad, that Sokoli Tumari Icha Moyam Taratumi Ma. Everything happens according to your will, O Mother, you who are the willful one. Loke bole koriyami. People say that I do, but actually you are the doer, O Mother. So in the path of Bhakti, again, you surrender the sense of doership to God. And liberation is from the standpoint of Bhakti in Karma Yoga, is to see that God does all and that God is all. That God is reality, God is manifest as this universe, God is all and God does all, I do nothing. I'm simply a child of the divine, of the same nature as the divine. And so the path in Karma Yoga combined with Bhakti is to surrender to God in love and making every act an act of worship. Doing everything that I do as an act of worship and as an offering to God. So if you're combining Karma Yoga with Jnana, you seek to do all of your actions with the sense that I am not the doer. The action happens, but I am the witness of the action. In the path of Bhakti, you don't start with that. You start with the sense that whatever I do as an offering to you. And then you gradually come through your increasing relationship with God, you come to the point where you feel the intensity of that relationship, and you feel that that becomes so real that you begin to see that God is the doer, that you do nothing, that God does everything. And so the path is one of surrender to God in love, through love, and making all an offering of devotion. So now Swamiji added something, a new perspective on Karma Yoga, which is not developed in the Gita. It's not contrary, but not developed much in the Gita. And that is still the bondage is the same. Bondage is that I think that I am the doer. Liberation is identity with reality. But through the worship of all of this as the reality. When I look inside, I see reality. When I look outside, I see divine reality. And so Swamiji presented this grand ideal of worshiping the Virat, worshiping the manifest universe as a manifestation of the reality. He said, don't seek God, S-E-E-K, don't seek God, just see him, he says in Inspired Talks. That's a wonderful statement. Don't seek God, just see him. Learning to look on the universe as a manifestation of the divine. In the beginning, we do that through our understanding. We come to an understanding of how that could be true. We gradually develop a faith in that idea, that conviction. But then as we begin to do it, that conviction grows because it's a conviction based on reality. And so we begin to learn to interact with the universe around us as a manifestation of reality itself. So this is not, again, contrary to the teaching of the Gita. Sri Krishna himself says, Vasudeva Sarvamiti, all of this is Vasudeva, all of this is the divine being. And one who sees sameness, the same Brahman in everything, such a one is established in sameness, Sri Krishna says in chapter 5. And so Sri Krishna teaches the essence of this, but Swamiji developed it, this idea of, and of course he got it in essence from Sri Ramakrishna, who said in ecstasy that it's not compassion towards others, it's seeing Shiva in the Jiva, seeing God in the individual and worshiping that the individual as God. So Swamiji gave this new path to the modern world of worshiping everything in the universe as God. Again, we start with conviction. That conviction goes deeper through understanding, not blind faith, but deep conviction based on deep understanding, deep reflection and meditation. And when we begin that worship, just as I said yesterday in answer to a question, a question about puja, I said that when you do puja, you gradually, but it doesn't take long, you fairly quickly come to the point where you feel when you offer a flower to the image, you feel that there's an actual acceptance there. You offer a flower to Sri Ramakrishna, for instance, and you feel that Sri Ramakrishna actually accepts it. Holy Mother actually accepts it. Swamiji actually accepts it. And so when you begin to interact with the world as divine, you begin to feel that there is a response on the other side, that there is a response from behind the veil of things that we see. There is the reality peering through, and that there is a response when you begin to worship the world, just as you feel that when doing puja. So now let me say just a few words before opening to question and answers. The actual title was The Ideal to be Sought, and I've only dealt with it somewhat conceptually from different perspectives. Let me say more specifically what Sri Krishna says about the ideal to be sought. For one thing, he says in chapter 4 and verse 28, verse 18, chapter 4, Karmanya karmaya pasyed akarmani cha karmayaha. One who sees in the midst of action, inaction. And in the midst of inaction sees action. Such a one is a buddhiman, is an illumined soul. Yukta Krishna Karmakrit. Such a one is the doer of all action. The one who sees in the midst of action sees silence. So the state that we are seeking through karma yoga is to be motionless in the midst of action. How does that happen? That happens when we give up the sense of being the doer. We let action happen and we remain as the self. That, of course, is the ideal. And the ideal in any yoga is the ultimate development of spirituality. So we're not talking about something that, oh yeah, I got it now, so I'll do that. Okay, from now on, I'm going to do that. No, it's not like that. Get it now, understand it now, and then we have something to aim towards. And then there's the spiritual path, which gradually takes us there. But the goal is to see inaction in the midst of action. Even when you're at your busiest, like Sri Krishna and Arjuna on the battlefield, in the midst of an actual battle, to feel perfect silence and stillness in the midst of it, because I see that I do nothing. I explained yesterday how this sense of responsibility for action is actually an illusion. I think that I'm speaking, but I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know what I'm doing. And I can gradually find that what I can do best is to let that just happen, to step back and let that happen. And because I don't know how to do it anyway, it's just happening. I don't know how to walk. Nobody knows how they walk. They just have a general idea, I'm going to walk, and it happens. So let it happen. Let it happen. Let that happen with other things also. It's not so easy, I admit. It's a lifetime's project, or several lifetimes project to get there. But if we can once see that I really don't know what I'm doing to begin with, and yet things happen, we can begin to back away from the action and watch things happen. And so the goal is to get to that point where in the midst of the most intense action, I'm perfectly still and the mind is perfectly quiet. And to see action in the midst of inaction. Swamiji explains it. That's a little harder to understand. Swamiji says that for such a great soul, they see in the midst of inaction the intensest action. Now that's strange because we're trying to get to silence and stillness. So we have to understand this as not contrary to that, but this in the midst of inaction, when you're sitting absolutely still, the wakefulness is intense. Not like that, not muscularly intense, not mentally intense, but there's full wakefulness. And so that's one of the things that I saw in some of the great souls I saw when in my early years in India, that around them there was an intensity, not a nervous intensity, not a physical intensity, not a muscular intensity, but there was a wakeful intensity, a wakefulness which was intense about them. Swamis like Swami Vireshwarananda, Swami Nirvanananda, Swami Saradeshananda, and other such great souls. And so in the midst of action, to be still and silent, and in the midst of inaction, to be intense. That is not to be half conscious or confused or whatever, but silent, still wakefulness. And then let me just say a little bit more, and then I'll ask for questions. And that for that, let us go to the Sthita Prajna Lakshanas, that is the qualities of the person of steady wisdom, which are described in the last many verses of chapter 2 in the Gita. And in the interest of time, let me just deal with the last 3. I was going to deal with 55 through 59, which are very helpful in understanding the ideal state of the karma yogi. But let me go to 70, 71, and 72. Verse 70 says, Apur Yamana Machala Pratishtam. So, I'm sorry, I know this, but now in the moment I'm forgetting it. Apur Yamanam Achala Pratishtam Samudramapa Pravishanti Yadvat Tadvat Kama Pravishanti Sarve Sashanti Mapnoti Nakama Kami. So Apur Yamanam Achala Pratishtam Samudramapa Pravishanti Yadvat. Let me, in the interest of time, let me just read the translation here of Swami Swarupananda. The one who lives devoid of longing, abandoning all desires, without the sense of I and mine, he, oh no, Oh, I see. As into the ocean, brimful and still, flow the waters, even so the sage, into whom enter all desires, he, and not the desirer of desires, attains to peace. So the image is beautiful. Let me, I know just reading it out, it's confusing, but let me go over it a little bit. As into the ocean, as into the full ocean, flow waters. So you have the ocean, and all of the rivers of all of the continents are pouring into the ocean constantly. And yet the full ocean remains still and unfazed by all of the waters coming in. So the heart of the sage is like that, like the ocean, where the rivers of the senses and the mind are bringing the experiences and all of the impulses and the actions and reactions from the outer world into the heart of the sage, and yet the heart of the sage remains like the ocean. So that's a wonderful description of the person of illumination who has become freed through karma yoga, that they are like the fullness, their heart is like the fullness of the ocean, and all of the experiences come in. And even when engaged in action, with all of the information, all of the experiences coming in through all of the senses and through the mind, the heart of the sage remains full like the ocean, unperturbed by anything. So as into the ocean, brimful and still, flow the waters. Even so the sage, into whom enter all desires, that is, all of the things coming in through the senses and the mind, he, and not the desirer of desires, attains to peace, because his desires have been silenced, because he's attained to fullness. He is the ocean. He is reality. He is fullness and knows that he is fullness. So what else is he to desire? And so 71 and 72 say, that one who lives devoid of longing, abandoning all desires, without the sense of I and mine, he attains to peace. Without the sense of I and mine, I'm not the doer, nor are the fruits mine. So such a one attains to peace. This is to have one's being in Brahman, says verse 72, O son of Pritha. None attaining to this become deluded. Being established therein, even at the end of life, one attains to oneness with Brahman. So the Brahma Nirvanam Richyate, such a one attains at the end of life to Brahma Nirvana. That is the identity with Brahman, or for the devotee, identity with God. And again, in the Gita, Sri Krishna teaches both paths very beautifully, the path of knowledge and the path of devotion. So the karma yogi, in attaining to that state of the non-doer, naham karta, naham bhokta, I am not the doer, I am not the enjoyer, their heart becomes like the ocean in which all experiences can still enter in when they're aware of the outer world, and yet the heart remains the same. That also is one of the amazing things that I used to see in the great souls that I saw in my early years in India, the ones that I had a chance to associate with, that their hearts were like oceans. In the case of Swami Saradeshananda Gopesh Maharaj, when I would go to him, even looking into his eyes, you felt like you were looking into the still ocean. You had the sense that these people, him and Swami Vireshwarananda, Swami Nirvanananda, and several others, you felt that they had attained to fullness and that nothing in the world could disturb them. Nothing could disturb them. Nothing could fluster them. Nothing could frustrate them. Yes, if they saw something wrong, then they would correct, and sometimes correct severely, and yet they would be still. So let me end by telling a story about Swami Nirvanananda. Some of our brahmacharis had come to Bellarmut from one of our foreign centers, and the Swami had heard about this center and something about the way the center was being run that he didn't like. And so the head didn't come with the brahmacharians, just some of the new brahmacharians came. And so when they came and bowed down to him and told him where they were from, he started scolding them and scolded them severely for 15 minutes with the full intensity of a mind which has become illumined. And so the brahmacharians were completely shaken. And of course, they weren't the ones who were causing the problems in this center, but they were what the Swami had at hand. So he was scolding through them. So after 15 minutes of a devastating scolding, then he sat back in his chair and said, "Of course, I have no emotion." And he just pulled back into himself and was his usual ocean-like self. And such a soul can do that because they can rouse, as Swami Vivekananda could. They can rouse a storm on the ocean of their self when they need it for a particular purpose. But that's just a storm which is roused for a particular purpose. And when the purpose is served, they go back to being the still and quiet ocean. And you could see that in him. I used to love to go to him on a daily basis to make pranam and to just see him sitting there, still with his eyes always looking in one direction, just like an ocean. And if he saw you coming in, he would slowly turn and focus on you, and then he would go back and just look like the ocean. It was an amazing sight to see. So that's the goal of karma yoga.
Thank you, Swami. It was brilliant. The first question is, given that Brahman is consciousness which does not act, why would anyone expect praying to God would yield any results?
Because God is real. God is, in Vedanta, God is the same reality. The problem with the explanations of things from the standpoint of Jnana Yoga it's not a problem from the standpoint of a person following Jnana Yoga. It's correct from the standpoint of Jnana Yoga. But the problem with it is that the explanations from the standpoint of pure Jnana Yoga are destructive of everything else. And so if you follow the idea of Jnana Yoga, that everything is just pure consciousness, there is Brahman, I am Brahman, and everything else is just part of this transactional world. And I want to say neti neti to all of that. That's neti neti to everything, including God. And so from the standpoint of Jnana Yoga, it often sounds like God is just a useful illusion that weak people use in order to realize God, because they're not smart enough and they're not good enough and they're not strong enough to follow the real path, which is Jnana Yoga, which teaches the actual truth. And Bhakti Yoga is just for weaklings and sentimental fools. And so many people use Jnana Yoga not so much as a path, but as a weapon to destroy everyone else's faith in other paths. That's not real Jnana Yoga. Jnana Yoga is an integral path which leads you and can lead you to reality. And the beauty of Jnana Yoga is it's extremely simple. And you get everything else out of the way except for the pure truth. And you try to focus on that. But again, that's Jnana Yoga as a path. Read the life and teachings of Sri Ramakrishna, and you'll see Sri Ramakrishna was one who remained immersed in Nirvikalpa Samadhi for 6 months. And that was his natural state, was the state of a jnani. That was his natural state. But when he emerged from that, he was full of devotion, because he saw that the infinite reality of Brahman and the mother of the universe, or father of the universe, or friend of the universe as God, that they were the same reality. When I see a universe of subject and object, then that same reality, which is Brahman, is the Divine Mother. And Sri Ramakrishna said both are the same reality, God and the self. And so praying to God is, for most people, a much easier way than just thinking I am Brahman, and not having the strength of mind to actually realize it or to act on it. The path of devotion to God is effective because it's based on reality. God is real. Now, Jnani will often say that, well, God is as real as this universe, but that means this universe isn't real, and so God also isn't real. But Sri Ramakrishna always emphasized that the Nitya and the Leela both are the same reality, that was the higher vision of the Vijnani. And so one prays to God because God is real. God is Brahman in relationship to me. I say Brahman alone is the only reality, and then I go eat lunch. I say Brahman is the only reality, and then I go take a nap. I say Brahman is the only reality, and then I take a shower and bathe myself. I say Brahman is the only reality, and I go watch a movie. But suddenly God becomes unreal, and prayer becomes unreal. That won't work. That won't work. So no, follow the path of pure Jnana Yoga. If you want, it will lead to the knowledge of Brahman. But follow the path of bhakti also if you want, because that also is real. God is real. God is not an illusion, a comforting illusion that weak people take up just because they're not good enough to follow Jnana Yoga. No, the great devotees who have attained to the knowledge of the absolute, and I'm going on with this answer for a while because it's extremely important. The great devotees who followed devotion up to the state of the highest identity with God, where they realized Brahman. And you find Christians who did that, you find Sufis who did that, and you find Vedantins, devotional Vedantins who did that as well. After their realization, they don't say, well, God, I'm so glad I got over that illusion of God. No, they come back filled with devotion, even more devotion for God. Now their devotion is living because they know the reality of God. And they know that the same Brahman, which was the transcendent reality they realized, is the face of their beloved that they're joined to in love. So don't think in terms of unreality of God. God is the reality itself. And prayer works because God hears, as Sri Ramakrishna said, even the footfall of an ant.
Okay. How can we use karma yoga, the only obvious path, if you're a householder, to refine ourselves as karma yogi?
Yes, karma yoga is fit for everyone. Swami Vivekananda said in the monastic order, he wanted all of his monks to follow whatever yoga they wanted or a combination they wanted, but everyone should follow something of karma yoga. But karma yoga is especially applicable to the householder because the householder has, by definition, so many responsibilities, civic responsibilities, family responsibilities, etc. And so in the household, you can follow it from the standpoint of Jnana Yoga. I'm not the doer, but that's difficult, I admit, but it's possible. But it's easy from the standpoint of devotion, to think that everything that I do, to think that my family, society, everything is the field of the play of God. And everything that I do is an offering. I take care of my child. My child itself is the image of God. And I take care of my child as a worship of God within the child. I take care of my partner as an embodiment of the divine being. I do my duties as my part in this grand sacrifice, which is the sacrifice of the cosmic being into multiplicity and the sacrifice of multiplicity back into the cosmic unity. And so all that I do is my little offering within this grand sacrifice. We can learn to make every act we do an act of worship. And let me finish by saying, re-quoting, as I quoted yesterday, Brother Lawrence, the great Carmelite monk. He said, now I have come to a point where even picking up a straw from the ground, I do for the love of God. It's not that God is sitting there saying, why doesn't Brother Lawrence pick up a straw for me? Doesn't he love me enough to pick up that straw? No, God doesn't need the straw. But I'm so full of love for God that everything I do as a worship, because I see that everything is a manifestation of God. So for the householder, that's the way to spiritualize the householder's life through karma yoga.
Swami, is it possible or advisable to follow the paths of both Jnana Yoga and Bhakti Yoga at the same time?
They can both be harmonized beautifully. How you bring a harmony between them in your own life, that will depend on your own temperament. Usually for most people, one is the dominant and the other is the one that is brought into their dominant path. Most people will either feel a primary urge towards jnana, knowledge, or a primary urge towards devotion. And so then, depending on that, is how you can merge the two. But there are many ways of bringing a harmony between the two. But as I said yesterday in answer to another question, just be sure that you see a point of harmony between them. Find a point of harmony between them. Don't worry, there are points of harmony and more than one. So you will find it if you want to follow both. And for most people, it's best to follow some of both, because the two paths fulfill different needs of your personality. And if you do the two together, then your development will be more harmonious and more full. You won't be leaving behind your emotional self just by following jnana yoga, or you won't be following your urge for truth if you just follow bhakti yoga.
Swami, how is seeing the world as divine similar to pantheism? And how is it different from pantheism?
Yes, now pantheism was the great bugbear in the West. In the Abrahamic traditions, there has always been this fear of pantheism, which is identifying the creator with the creation. And so the way that the Abrahamic traditions, well, like, let me take the example of Christianity. Each one did it slightly differently, but Christianity is a good example. They have the idea of ex nihilo creation, the creation out of nothing. That's because if there was God plus something that God used to make the universe, then God is compromised. He's not everything. But if God made the universe out of himself, then God is a changing God, and that also is not acceptable. So Vedanta, or at least the non-dualistic school of Vedanta, and the Tantric Advaita schools as well of Vedanta, they overcame the problem of a changing God, God changing into the universe, by saying that God doesn't change. God is the infinite reality. God is the transcendent, perfect reality, and this universe is either an appearance of that reality, or this universe is a dance of that reality. So Sri Ramakrishna gave the example of the serpent. The serpent when it's still and the serpent when it's moving, it's the same serpent. And so this universe is a beautiful example, because this universe is Brahman, or using God talk, it is God. This universe is God, but it's a misreading of God. But the example of the serpent moving, that's what this universe is. Everything is an appearance, a wave-like appearance in the reality. Everything here is vibration, but a vibration of what? A vibration of reality. So even the vibration is not real. The reality is the silent, transcendent reality. But this is the play of that reality, and so Vedanta avoids a changing God by saying that this universe is either an appearance and not real, or it is the play, the dance of Mother Kali, the dance of Shiva, the dance of Sri Krishna playing his flute and calling all souls towards himself.
I'm muted here. If we say God is responsible for our action, does that not take away our personal responsibility?
Eventually, that's what we want. But I understand the point of the question, and no. As long as we feel that we are doing, we can't escape responsibility. As long as we have the sense that I am doing something, karma will result from my actions, and I will have to experience the results of my karma. So while I'm on the path, moving towards feeling that God does everything, Uh, uh, I haven't yet gotten there. And as long as I have not gotten there, I will still be performing karma and the karma will still come to me. But the time will come when I actually feel that I do nothing. And then I have broken the bonds of karma. And so what we want to do is to get to where I have no responsibility for anything because I do nothing. But then there's not the problem of being irresponsible because I actually do nothing. Then I see that it's God who does everything through me. Or from the standpoint of the impersonal, I see that it's the gunas of Prakriti, as Sri Krishna explains it, gunas of Prakriti that are doing everything. I do nothing. So at that point, there's no danger of not being responsible. Until we get to that point, we are responsible. And so it's an attempt to surrender the idea of responsibility to God. But until we actually experience that, yes, we will be responsible. We can't get out of it.
Could you please explain a little more about samadhi?
A little more about samadhi. Yes.
In 3 minutes.
In 3 minutes. Okay. Samadhi, as you know, there are different states of samadhi. And so there's the Vedantins divide, because they're not really interested in samadhi, they divide it into two, savikalpa and nirvikalpa. That's enough from the standpoint of Advaita Vedanta. Savikalpa means it's a state of complete concentration of mind where there's only one idea in the mind. And that idea is steady in the mind. It remains steady in the mind. And the experience in Savikalpa Samadhi is that that one idea is all that exists, because that's a state of complete concentration where that's all that is in the mind. You don't hear anything, you don't see anything, you don't feel anything. The sense of the body goes, there's just that one idea. And so usually that idea will be a spiritual idea, but it doesn't have to be. You can attain to samadhi just by concentrating on a black dot or a golf ball. But if it's a spirit, say if it's a deity, you meditate on Sri Ramakrishna and suddenly he becomes living, and the only thing in your consciousness is the living presence of Sri Ramakrishna. That's Savikalpa Samadhi. Like Sri Ramakrishna, when he was trying to attain, or when he was studying under Totapuri, and Totapuri told him to make his mind completely free of ideas, and the living form of the Divine Mother would come. So finally, Sri Ramakrishna took the sword of discrimination and cut through the form of Mother Kali and was plunged into Nirvikalpa Samadhi. So Nirvikalpa Samadhi is the state where there are no vikalpas. There are no waves in the mind. The mind has become stilled, or from a higher standpoint, the mind has merged back into consciousness itself. Sri Ramakrishna said, the pure mind, the pure buddhi, and the pure self are the same reality. And so when the mind has become so pure that there is absolutely no change in the mind at all, then the mind becomes that which it is in reality, which is pure consciousness. And so that is a state which can't be described because it's beyond the mind. It's a state where there's no dimension, there's no direction, there's no up, there's no down, no right, no left, no greater intensity, lesser intensity. Nothing can be said of it, except that it's pure knowledge and bliss.
Thank you, Swami.